Ever since My Little Pony Friendship is Magic started to become immensely popular in the early 2010s, many fans of the show had begun wondering if a movie based on MLP G4 would ever be made. It seemed like it only made sense after all. And well, they technically got their wish with the 2013 release of Equestria Girls. Although, I think a spin-off where the main six turn into humans attending high school was not exactly what a lot of fans were expecting. No, they wanted a movie fully based on the original show itself. And they finally got their wish in 2017 with My Little Pony, the movie. The film focuses on the villains, the Storm King, and Tempest Shadow invading Equestria. So the main six go on a big adventure, encountering new places and creatures like the sea ponies along the way. And eventually, they manage to save the day by defeating the Storm King and reforming Tempest Shadow, because the magic of friendship always prevails or something. You get the gist. However, what if I told you that countless things in this movie could have turned out a lot differently? This film had been in some form of production ever since at least 2014, so inevitably, a lot of ideas for parts of the story, characters, and locations seen in the movie were drastically changed, or alternatively, just completely left unrealized on the cutting room floor forever. And today, not only will I be talking about MLP the movie itself, but afterwards, I'll also go over plans and concept art for an entirely cancelled sequel MLP G4 movie and a G4 reboot movie. This is the My Little Pony movie we never got. But before I get into that, I need to tell you a bit about this video's sponsor, Raycon. The new year of 2025 is now here, and sticking to my New Year resolutions, like procrastinating less, has never been easier thanks to Raycon's everyday earbuds. They have tens of thousands of 5-star reviews online, and their latest model is better than ever. It features a 32-hour battery life, new active noise cancelling so you can entirely tune out any distractions, and the all-new quick charge function, which delivers 90 minutes of battery in a lightning-fast 10 minutes. These features, especially noise cancelling, can be hard to come by at a reasonable price point, and Raycon's earbuds are quite reasonably priced. Their quality is on par with some of the biggest names in audio, but they start at about half the price of other brands. They are also the most comfortable ergonomic in-ear buds I have ever used. Such is the case, they have been my go-to pair every day when I'm sticking to my New Year goals. I also love these super sleek and stylish looking protective case covers they have to prevent any potential pesky scratches when I put them in my bag or pocket. And because wireless charging is supported, you don't even have to take this cover off to charge up your Raycon earbuds in no time at all. So, if you're interested, go over to buyraycon.com/TobbyMLP to get 15% off site-wide. That's correct, you'll get 15% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/TobbyMLP. Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and now, onto that movie we never got. To start things off, there was originally going to be some type of prologue intro sequence at the very beginning of the movie. According to an excerpt in the book The Art of My Little Pony the Movie, which is where a lot of what I'll be talking about today comes from, one early idea for the prologue was to show the Storm King overthrowing a kingdom, to show the scope of his might. Whereas another idea for the sequence was to show the Storm King, with the help of Tempest Shadow, stealing the staff he uses to summon the Superstorm from Scorpan, the brother of T-Rex who was briefly depicted in the show. Both of these ideas, however, were eventually scrapped in favor of a more slow-paced and elegant prologue that aimed to introduce Equestria to new viewers by showing the princesses and main six on stained glass, and while also foreshadowing Tempest Shadow. What's most interesting about this is the fact this idea for the prologue actually did get entirely finished, but for some odd reason, it just wasn't ever put into the final cut of the movie, and was only ever made available through the DVD/Blu-ray releases as a deleted scene, which kind of sucks because I think it would have been a much better opening. One question some of you may have had in the back of your head when watching the movie was, wait, where was Ponyville? Aside from shortly being seen in the distance of one shot, it doesn't appear in the movie whatsoever, which, considering it's quite iconic to the imagery of MLP G4, it feels like an oddly important location to be almost completely absent. Well, through various pieces of concept art, it becomes clear that Ponyville was definitely at one point intended to be a more prominently featured location, but I guess it was eventually decided that Canterlot would be a better backdrop for the Friendship Festival. Songbird Serenade, that one pop star pony seen in the beginning and ending parts of the film, went through a few different early designs. Most notably, this one, which has an almost entirely different design and color palette, including an old unused cutie mark. Throughout the production of MLP the movie, the character who went through the single most redesigns and changes was without a doubt Tempest Shadow. The earliest known incarnation of her was actually not an antagonist, but rather just a reclusive unicorn who was going to be one of the side characters the main six would have encountered on their journey, with the art director of the movie, Rebecca Dott, describing her as, quote, more just a wild pony who left Equestria and was living on her own in the wastelands. Meanwhile, one of the main antagonists of the movie would have at one point been a pony named Cosmos, who later on would have been revealed to be Princess Celestia and Luna's estranged, long-lost brother. His motivation for being a villain was apparently that he was obsessed with power. He despised the way his sisters used their power, and he wanted to conquer all of Equestria with the Storm King. In the concept art shown here, Cosmos was seemingly going to be a unicorn, or maybe an alicorn, who would have obscured his pony form using a set of armor, which is sometimes depicted as being made out of pieces from various animals whose kingdoms he had previously conquered, which is quite brutal, so it's not too surprising this idea got cut. Most notably though, Cosmos is always shown here as having a broken off horn, with one iteration of him even having a type of magical staff or element attached to the rest of his horn. Luna and Celestia's long-lost brother Cosmos would, however, not see the light of day. It appears that at a certain point in the movie's production, the line began to blur between the unnamed wasteland pony and the villain Cosmos, until eventually they were just fused and mixed together into one single character, the end result being Tempest Shadow. Although it definitely could have been interesting to see what they were going to do with Cosmos, especially with his relation to Celestia and Luna. Another character in the movie who also went through a ton of different designs and changes was the Storm King. The first incarnation of him was in the form of a type of creature who had elemental abilities which would have allowed him to transform into some kind of terrifying storm or weather condition, which would have brought a new meaning to the name Storm King. However, he was then redesigned to have a more wolf-like appearance based on a creature from Japanese mythology called a Raiju. And rather than he himself being the living embodiment of an actual storm, he was instead apparently just given the power to summon storms at will. There's this pretty cool concept art that shows Cosmos and this early version of the Storm King about to fight one another. Eventually, however, the decision was made to turn him into a more advanced anthropomorphic mix of a yak and a baboon, who was also now bipedal. This was more or less the version of the Storm King we got in the movie. However, in some concept art by people like Jose Lopez, it's evident they were originally going for a more intimidating and stoic vibe for him. And it seems like his character as a whole, including his backstory, was gradually toned down to be more lighthearted or even comedic, which was seemingly because they wanted to make sure his design fit in with the rest of the characters in the film. Something else in the movie, which also got a similar treatment of being toned down a bit, were the various storm creatures you can see in Tempest Shadow's army. They overall didn't go through too many major changes, but you can tell they were also originally conceptualized to be more intimidating and scary, with some early designs featuring things like skulls and bones, more visible teeth, and bigger pieces of armor. Something else related to these storm creatures, which hardly anybody knows about, is an entirely scrapped character from the movie named General Clavis. He can be seen in this one single piece of concept art, and he surprisingly appeared in the MLP mobile game made by Gameloft as a part of the Resistance Rising storyline. According to the game, Clavis was apparently going to be the storm creature general in charge of invading Ponyville, but he ended up fighting a resistance movement led by Starlight Glimmer, Trixie, and the Cutie Mark Crusaders. Now, I'm not sure if this was what General Clavis and those other characters were actually going to do in the movie itself if he hadn't been scrapped, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think it sounds cool, so it's good enough for me. According to the Art of MLP the movie book, there was originally going to be a fairly long travel montage sequence showing the main six in various places before they eventually ended up in the dry desert. There are many pieces of concept art that show what some of these environments would have been like. This includes massive overgrown forests with giant bodies of water and long-abandoned ancient cities and landmarks. According to the background designer Luke Buxton, they were trying to illustrate just how much the main six were out of their depth, adventuring into treacherous territory they are unfamiliar with, and I would say they succeeded. I also get the impression they were also going for a bit of a more mysterious or slightly unnerving vibe in general. However, most of the environments intended for the montage would unfortunately get scrapped, and now the concept art is all we have left. Speaking of locations, there was also a ton of concept art featuring early designs for Kluge Town, and also its residents. For instance, there were these drawings by Luke Buxton that show kind of a more gritty town on the side of a mountain, and there's also this concept art by Christine Choi, which shows an early version of a local tavern the main six would have went into. However, the most notable and just kind of out of place idea for a My Little Pony movie from Kludgetown was another early version of a tavern, which would have been a giant dragon skull or skeleton impaled on the top of a mountain. According to the concept artist Alexia Trifon, the townspeople would have also been slowly harvesting the crystal heart of the dragon. And additionally, the creatures inside of the tavern would have been equally as grotesque, with these sketches by Steve Prescott showing some quite different early versions of what became the inhabitants of Kludgetown. It's interesting to see that stuff like this was even considered for an MLP movie, and it's not too surprising that they were cut. The anthropomorphic cat the main six meet in Kludgetown, Capel, also used to be fairly different, having been initially conceptualized with the name Mendax, which is Latin for Lyle. At numerous points during production, he was going to be various different animals, including a fox, a honey badger, a ferret, a wolf or dog, and maybe even a rabbit, all before a more back-alley cat design was ultimately chosen. Additionally, according to Rebecca Dott, Capel's tail would have also had its own personality at one point, which you can see in some concept art where it looks like it has its own face and mouth. The pirate crew which the main six meet on their airship after their escape from Kludgetown were also characters who went through a lot of changes. Story-wise, apparently they were initially created to be purely antagonists in the movie, and you can see this in their original designs, where they look a lot more intimidating. Believe it or not, but I even managed to find a short 6-second test animation from when the pirates were bad guys, where Applejack is kicking one of them into a pile of barrels. However, despite this, they were eventually changed in the story to be more friendly to the main six, which was reflected in their subsequent designs we see in the final movie. All these early pieces of concept art of the pirates are pretty cool, but one in particular that caught my eye was this pirate, who is straight up holding 2 guns. Like yeah, this was an idea that genuinely got somewhat close to being canon in the MLP universe. Anyways, though, one more change with the pirate crew is notably an earlier version of Captain Ciliano named Madame Hoppy. As you can see, she was also going to be a bird with a prosthetic leg, but her color palette here is almost completely different, and she also at one point would have had a prosthetic hand hook made out of a dragon tooth. Moving on, in a draft for the script of the movie, when the pirates were still antagonists, the main six would have somehow escaped from the pirates and ended up in a type of swampy forest inhabited by a bunch of giant mud troll creatures that resembled slugs. According to Rebecca Dott, they were apparently going to be a bunch of bullies that tried the patience of the main six. But as the script of the movie was being fleshed out, they, and the location itself, were eventually scrapped altogether. The few pieces of concept art showing these mud trolls are pretty interesting, especially this one where it looks like the pirate airship has crashed into the forest, and Twilight Sparkle is oddly missing from the rest of the main group, which may be a hint at a different version of the story, where Twilight was captured by Tempest Shadow a bit earlier than she was in the final version of the movie. The next location that the main six actually did go to in the movie, Mount Eris, also has a few interesting pieces of concept art, like this one by Joey Mason, which shows a much more narrow and seemingly high up in the clouds version of the abandoned Mount Eris. Or these drawings by Alexia Trifon of the city's design and architecture. However, the more interesting cut concepts from this section of the movie are definitely from when the main six enter Sequestria. Design-wise, the sea ponies went through some interesting early variations for how they should look in both their hippogriff and sea pony forms. Queen Novo originally had this completely different design, heavily inspired by a peacock bird, but according to Rebecca Dot, they ultimately had to redesign and simplify her from scratch so she would be easier and cheaper to animate, which sucks because she looks pretty nice here. Queen Novo's daughter, Princess Skystar, also had a few early designs, different from what we got in the movie. But interestingly enough, she was also going to have two sisters named Haven Bay and Selena Blue, but they got reduced to being just background characters because the writers felt like Skystar would work better as a character if she was more lonely. Aside from that, there are a few other things, like concept art of places in Sequestria, and also these slightly earlier designs of the main six plus Spike as sea ponies, which I think look a bit better than what we got in the final movie. In terms of cut story elements, after Twilight was caught trying to steal Queen Novo's pole, instead of the main six just being banished from Sequestria, they were apparently first going to be put in jail. According to Rebecca Dot, the jail was actually going to be a giant fish named Theodore who trapped prisoners by making a bubble in his teeth. Fluttershy apparently would have spoken to the other prisoners, and the main six would have then somehow escaped from Theodore, not before making their way back up to the surface. If I had to guess, this planned sequence in the movie was likely scrapped because of pacing concerns, or maybe time constraints. Moving on, the next big change in the movie had to do with the Battle of Canterlot near the end. Apparently, there was originally a version of the battle where the hippogriffs swooped in to save the day, using their powerful wings to defeat the Storm Creature army, while the ponies presumably confronted the Storm King. However, according to Rebecca Dot, the overall feeling was that the main six should be the main heroes. So the Battle for Canterlot and ending of the movie as a whole pivoted to include them more, which I would say is understandable as it is supposed to be their movie after all. In an early version of the climactic final battle, the main six and Tempest Shadow have with the Storm King, there was apparently this idea where the ponies would magically transform into a type of special version of themselves that would give them the upper hand. There are a few pieces of concept art of Twilight in this transformed state, and I think it probably would have been cool to see. However, the idea was eventually abandoned because the production team felt like too much of a similar concept had already been done in the show, presumably with stuff such as Rainbow Power in the Season 4 finale. The end credits sequence at the end of the movie, featuring the cast of characters drawn in that pointy pony art style, was made by a company called Claws Studios. And on their website, they showed some early concept art of the sequence. It appears that originally they were going to go for a style imitating drawings made in a sketchbook with post-it notes attached to the paper. But eventually, they transitioned to the storybook style we see in the movie. Although there are still a few scenes in this style that also went unused. Personally, I think the end credits are one of the most charming looking parts of the whole movie, so it's interesting to see this early work in progress version of it. In the afterward part of the Art of MLP the movie book, the director of the film, Jason Thiessen, has a part where he reflects back on the making of the movie in general. The most interesting excerpt is when he basically talks about how, due to the main six leaving Equestria, and therefore the production team not being super restricted by the canonicity of the show, they originally envisioned the movie as being a lot more ambitious and longer than what we got. Furthermore, he also says that they originally intended on diving deeper into each of the experiences of the characters while they were on their journey. And you can definitely see that in many pieces of early art and cut concepts I have shown and talked about thus far. There's even a few scrapped details from the making of the movie I haven't mentioned yet. Like, there were originally going to be these two side characters who would have tagged along on the main six's adventure, named Greedy, a mole rat, and Needy, who I don't know who he's supposed to be because he's only ever referred to as a little guy. And the staff which the Storm King uses in the movie was initially going to be just a random weapon he found, until it evolved into being a small piece of the Tree of Harmony, which he apparently stole and turned into a staff. The point is that the production team of the movie had a lot of neat, ambitious ideas, but there was ultimately only so much that could fit into an 85-minute movie, and a few concepts were also a bit too aggressive for the My Little Pony universe. So a ton of stuff had to be trimmed back, or alternatively, completely cut out. But regardless, I think it's cool these scrapped parts of the movie still get to see the light of day, albeit if only just in the form of concept art. So, let me know down in the comments below which cut concept from the movie I featured was your favorite. Personally, I think Cosmos, the original villain of the movie, who was going to be Celestia and Luna's long-lost brother, seems like he could have been quite an interesting character, so it kinda sucks we never got him. Now, normally, this is where the video would end. However, something interesting not a lot of MLP fans know about is the fact there was at one point going to be a second MLP G4 movie that was in early development for a short time. For some context, in the second half of 2017, Hasbro began making their plans for the future of MLP G4 and the My Little Pony franchise in general for the next few years. These plans were eventually leaked, and various pieces of concept art were later shared online. So, it's possible for us to piece together a cohesive enough picture of what we could have got. First and foremost, Instead of the finale of G4 being the Season 9 MLP FIM episode, The Last Problem, part of the original plan was for a whole feature-length movie to be made, which was intended to be a big series finale for the show. This incarnation of the film was worked on by DHX Media, the same studio who made the show itself, and also another studio called Boulder Media, with it being planned to release sometime in late 2019 or early 2020, shortly after MLP FIM was going to end. It's a bit hard to ascertain what would have happened in this G4 finale movie, but there is concept art by people like Pablo R. Mayo and Rebecca Dart, which gives us a vague idea. Twilight Sparkle being kind of bored, or maybe even unhappy, with her role as a princess of Equestria, is for one reason or another eventually motivated to go on one big final adventure with her friends. On this adventure, they once again go beyond the confines of Equestria, encounter several new characters, and find themselves in new locations too. Most interestingly, there would have been this place in the movie called Neon City, which went through several different early designs. Aside from that, there's a few other pieces of concept art showing the main six on their adventure, including this one where they encounter a dragon. And there's a few other pieces showing off reimagined locations from the show, like these two of Canterlot and Rainbow Falls. In terms of new characters, there's this character sheet drawn by Rebecca Dart featuring several possible villains or antagonists we could have seen in the movie, including this one elephant snake creature whose look was apparently inspired by Danny DeVito. Furthermore, in this art I showed a moment ago, there's this unnamed bluish-gray pony who's chilling with the main six, so I guess they could have been a new side character or something. And well, that's all the info on this G4 finale movie I could find. The reason for that is how Hasbro ultimately decided quite quickly to instead have DHX Media make the finale to G4 the ending of MLP FIM Season 9. And to have the previously mentioned Boulder Media make a CGI animated Generation 4 reboot movie followed up by a new show. This G4 reboot movie and series was, in fact, the original incarnation of Generation 5 of My Little Pony. Now, if you're wondering what exactly a G4 reboot entails, it basically involved taking the main six, plus maybe a few other characters from MLP Friendship is Magic, and reimagining them to have slightly different designs / personalities, while trying to keep all these same fundamental qualities which made them so likable and iconic in G4. Additionally, this rebooted G4 also would have been set in a completely new universe, separate from Equestria. There are numerous pieces of concept art from this period of the movie's production, showing various different redesigns of the main six in various different art styles. You can tell that they were definitely trying to experiment to see what style worked best. As you probably already have noticed, however, the pony tribes of half of the main characters were also indeed going to be swapped around a bit, in hopes of putting a unique spin on things. Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity were going to remain the same, but Twilight Sparkle was going to become an Earth Pony, Pinkie Pie a Pegasus, and Fluttershy a Unicorn. It goes without saying, these changes would have altered the dynamic of the main six in a ton of different ways. Twilight is the most notable in my opinion, as her now lacking both traditional unicorn magic and wings to fly with would have made her substantially different from the Twilight we know in MLP FIM. Pinkie Pie being a Pegasus here also could have been interesting, especially since she was originally conceptualized as one by Lauren Faust in 2008 before her pair of wings were given to Fluttershy. Other than their pony tribes being a bit different, most of these main six redesigns made for the reboot were genuinely still reminiscent of how the ponies looked in G4, with one noteworthy outlier being Applejack. In several pieces of concept art, she's easily the one who looks the most different, ranging from maybe a new hairstyle or accessory to effectively just being an entirely new character altogether. Like yes, this pony you're looking at is supposed to be Applejack, and she was changed in this way on purpose. I already talked about this in a previous video of mine, but basically, Hasbro did not really like Applejack for reasons that boiled down to her not being as popular or marketable for selling as many pony toys as the other main characters did. So, after a while, they instructed people working on ideas for the G4 reboot movie to find a solution to the Applejack problem, which curiously involved essentially just trying to start over from scratch with her design. We were genuinely somewhat close to the Applejack we knew in MLP FIM kinda not existing anymore, which is funny to think about. Moving on, there's also a few other interesting pieces of concept art here, including Earth Pony Twilight flying with DIY wings she made. These two ponies who were going to be a sheriff and deputy, Twilight being in some type of dark void, and this group shot of the main six altogether. Now, whether or not these quite bold design changes to the main six would have actually been executed well to fit their personalities, or resulted in a more interesting dynamic in the narrative beyond, hey, the main cast from G4 are back, and are a bit different now, I can't really say for sure. All I could really ascertain about the general story this movie could have had is that it was going to be set in a new universe, where Earth Pony Twilight lives in some type of remote village, goes on an adventure, and ends up meeting and befriending the rest of the main six again. If I had to guess, the plot maybe would have been vaguely similar to what happens in the My Little Pony: A New Generation movie from 2021. Oh yeah, and speaking of that movie, it's now time to address the elephant in the room. This whole G4 reboot idea for Generation 5 of MLP never happened. In about the middle of 2018, Hasbro, for one reason or another, instructed Boulder Media to shift their focus from making the movie a reboot of G4 to instead more of a sequel to G4 that's just set really far into the future. With this change in direction, all of the main six redesigns I just showed you were scrapped in favor of making an entirely new cast of main characters for G5 instead. Over the course of the next few years, the movie went under further production, until being released as MLP: A New Generation in 2021, marking the beginning of the MLP G5 we actually got. and that follow-up series I mentioned a bit ago eventually turned into the Netflix exclusive show called My Little Pony: Make Your Mark. Throughout the making of MLP A New Generation, countless other ideas, characters, or parts of the story were also cut and never saw the light of day. This video is already getting long enough though, so all of that is for a video for another time. I'm not too sure why exactly Hasbro chose to ditch the G4 reboot idea, but if I had to take an educated guess, it's possible they simply thought that immediately following up the ending of G4 with a reboot featuring all the same characters would seem a bit weird, so they canned the idea. For now, at least. Regardless, though, you should all let me know down in the comments below whether or not you think G5 would have been better if it was a reboot of G4. Personally, I think some of the concept art here did look quite promising and interesting, but overall, I'm glad G5 moved away from being just a reboot. With that all having been said, I believe everything I showed here, from both the making of the 2017 movie and the cancelled sequel and the reboot, kinda goes to show how much creativity is poured into films like these. The artists behind them are often restricted by things out of their control, like the budget and time constraints. So inevitably, a lot of interesting ideas just get left behind. But at the very least, by archiving and appreciating them, we can make sure their ideas don't get totally forgotten. This was the My Little Pony movie we never got. Thanks for watching. Well, that was the video, and now here's the outro. This video was quite interesting to do research for. I learned a lot of new stuff, so I hope you enjoyed watching it. I decided to lump together me talking about technically 3 different movies, as I thought it makes more sense than to talk about them in separate videos. So yeah. And while I'm here, I might as well acknowledge that this will also be my final video of 2024, so I hope you guys have liked what I made this year. I kinda uploaded less frequently than I wanted to, which might change next year, but we'll see, I guess. With that said though, that's all for now. So, I will see you whenever I see you.